A father carried his hungry son on his back, and when he saw his son at the end of the day, he did not stop screaming. Hugo and his wife had had a small son at a time when they had not planned for it, as they did not have the means to give him a good life. However, they loved each other so much that they knew that together they would make it through and overcome any difficulties, and so they worked every day without rest to get, little by little, everything they needed. However, during the last month of pregnancy, his wife became ill. They had not counted on it, and the little they had managed to save for their son, they had to invest in his wife's treatment. Unfortunately, nothing seemed to work, and 6 months after the child was born, Hugo suffered the worst loss of his life that would mark him forever. He was now a widowed father of a 6-month-old baby with no job, no savings, and no opportunities in sight. All he knew was that whatever he did, he could not leave his son alone. He himself had had a very difficult childhood and had had to endure loneliness from such a young age. He would not do the same for his son. Wherever he was, he would be there too. Of course, that was one of the reasons he was not employed. No one wanted a worker who had a baby with him all the time, even though Hugo's son was so calm and quiet that it was hardly noticeable. And just when Hugo was about to despair because he had nothing to feed his son, he got the job where they would spend the next 3 years. It was a company that produced and transported purines and concentrates for animals. His job consisted of loading and unloading the packages from the trucks and also transporting them to the neighboring cities. Of course, it was too much work for one person, with days that were too heavy for a man who also carried a child on his back all day long. But it was his only chance, and he did not intend to waste it. From the very beginning, Hugo felt that his strength was exhausted, and yet he had to continue and endure his limits of endurance every day because, for the first time in months, he had the means to feed his son, or at least for neither of them to go hungry, even though he didn't have enough for anything else either. He hadn't dreamed about his son growing up just watching him work, without play, without interacting with other children, but there was nothing he could do. He only hoped that this was temporary and that luck would improve soon for both of them. Hugo also had such a sensitive heart that he not only cared for them, but for everyone he saw in need. That's why, whenever he could share with someone, he would do it, even if it was just a piece of bread. He was always willing to help the little animals he found, and more than once, without being aware of it, he would pick up the few grains of concentrate and purine that escaped from the bags and give them to the starving dogs and kittens he saw. Although there were many who suffered, and very little he managed to collect, but he did what he could. Months and years went by, although Hugo did not give up hope that everything would change for the better someday. His son had just turned 3 years old, and until then, he did not know what it was like to run in parks or meet other children. And although Hugo took advantage of every free minute to play with him and teach him what he needed to learn, he couldn't help but feel devastated at the impossibility of offering his son something better. He had been working in the same job for so long that he practically did not look for other options because he had no time left for it either. So he began to take excessive care of his job, despite how much he hated it, and kept to himself any comment or attitude that might make him look bad in front of his bosses. But one day, tired of seeing so many animals dying of hunger every day, he was encouraged to ask him if he could use the waste from the production, which he knew there was plenty of, to feed them. His bosses reacted with mockery and said no to the proposal, but the rejection of this did not give him as much as their cruel mockery towards the suffering animals, and Hugo felt his blood boiling inside. So that day, without thinking of the consequences, even though he knew he would be thrown out, he entered the factory and began to pack the waste in bags before the astonished gaze of the employees, who thought he had lost his mind. Hugo managed to get out and feed many small animals before his bosses realized what he had done, but as expected, they told him not to come back and did not even pay him for the days he had already worked that month. They did not even care about his son's crying when he saw the way they shouted at his father, and even took off the shirt he was wearing with the company's logo on it. The unfortunate scene took place at the entrance of the company before the perplexed gaze of passersby. Neither Hugo nor his former bosses noticed that among those who were watching him was an elegant, somewhat older man whom everyone knew in the city, but no one had seen in the midst of scandals. It was the owner of one of the most important hotel chains in the country, and the man, despite not knowing the whole story, was so alarmed at the way that they were humiliating that humble employee who was with his young son that he immediately approached him. The man asked Hugo to tell him what was going on. He told him everything, and then without a second's hesitation, he offered him a job. Hugo could not believe his ears and even asked him not to make fun of him, but when he saw the way the man was looking at him, he understood that it was true and felt that he had met an angel on the way, because he never imagined that in less than half an hour after losing his job, he would get another one with a boss that would be much better than the ones he had had. And he was not wrong, because now, in his new job, Hugo learned for the first time in many years what welfare and good treatment were. And above all, he knew the peace of knowing that now his son had everything he needed, and after all, he could have a happy and peaceful childhood. Although his good deed had brought him negative consequences in his job, it had also opened new doors for him. Hugo, after so many years working in the same job and feeling that it was his only option to be able to feed his son, had resigned himself to endure the mistreatment and excessive exploitation of those who, without caring that he carried a weight with his son on his back, gave him even more work than the others because he was the most needy. His bosses had achieved everything at the expense of the sweat and tears of others. They had been unfair to all their workers, and they had never been kind to the animals either. But they did not mind seeing him suffering from hunger while they carried tons of purine and concentrate. Their lack of love and understanding was not worthy of a heart as pure as Hugo's, who had finally had enough of what they had put him through. Luckily, his new employers were totally different, and from the very first moment, they welcomed Hugo and his young son as part of the family. Hugo began to receive a decent salary with normal working hours, and also learned for the first time what it was like to have health insurance, and for his son to be able to study thanks to the educational vouchers he received. He had received so much in such a short time after going through so many needs that he felt the scales were finally tipping in his favor, and he knew that his wife from heaven had been watching over him to make it happen. Until the last of his days, Hugo felt that she was with him, and he died peacefully many years later, knowing that they would soon be reunited. In his life, his son had all the opportunities that they had lacked, and he was at peace knowing that his sacrifice had been worth it, and that his son always knew how to appreciate it. Every day, he remembered his father's strength and love that reached out to humans and animals alike, and was his best example of life. If you liked this story, like it, share it with your friends and family, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and see you in the next story.